Welcome all. Lovely to be with you all, and an honour to be able to share some Torah with you. I've actually been invited by Rabbi Dan to give a Shabbat HaGadol drosha today, and I immediately accepted, and I'll tell you why in a second. Although really I've had little time to think about this drosha, because I was only asked yesterday afternoon, but the truth is I'm going to use something which I've done before, and I've shared with you before, as a rabbi at the shul, and going to summarize it a bit and make it more contemporary for today. Because as you know, I like to show that the Torah speaks to us today. It actually gives us a message in contemporary times. And sadly, we're going through this crisis altogether at the moment. And I think the Torah tells us something about this as well, and gives us some lesson to learn from this, of how we should handle it. It's interesting because a number of years ago, when I was actually visiting Sydney, and I was just by chance at the Great Synagogue in Sydney, on the yard side of my father, and that was just totally by chance. And on Saturday I went to shul, and I'm sitting in the seat that I used to sit for many years as a kid beside my father. And I called up to the Torah, because it's yard site. And Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence, who was the rabbi at the time, said to me, as I was going down from the Aliyah, he said, "Look, we'd be honoured if you would give the drosha today." Now, the drosha was only in 15 minutes' time, and I really had very little time to think. So I said to Rabbi Lawrence, I said, "Look, to be quite frank with you, I prefer hearing you today, because I really have no time to think of a message." So I went down to the seat, and I'm sitting there beside where my father used to sit, on his yard site, and I hear my father saying to me, "David, how can you say no to the rabbi?" He said this twice to me. So I ran up to Rabbi Lawrence, and I said, "Rabbi Lawrence, I've just heard from my father, and he's told me I've got to give the drosha. How can I say no to a rabbi?" So when Rabbi Dan asked me yesterday, I said, how can I say no to a rabbi? So although I'm not that prepared, I'm going to say a few words which I hope is an inspiring message to the whole congregation. This leads me actually to a thought from the Haftorah of this week, which of course is the Haftorah for Shabbat HaGadol, which means the great Shabbat, the big Shabbat. Gadol means great in Hebrew. And at the end of the Haftarah, it says as follows: before the world will have total redemption with the coming of the prophet Elijah, it says, "V'heshiv leiv avot al banim," and the heart of the fathers will be turned to their children. V'leiv banim, and the heart of the children, al avotam, will be turned to their fathers. And of course their mothers, their parents. Because what it's telling us here, at this time, just before Pesach, we actually remember that the story of the Passover, which has been handed down from generation to generation, is in our conscience, is in our hearts, in our minds, because we hear it. We've heard it for thousands of years, handed down from generation to generation. We've heard our fathers and our mothers. And in our conscience and in our hearts, we actually relate the story, as I said, from parents to children. Now, this, of course, has great relevance to Pesach, but the reason that this particular Shabbat is called Gadol, because it says in the Haftorah, it says as follows: Elijah Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, Lifnei, he will come before Yom Hashem Hagadol Hanorah. He will come before the great day Gadol of redemption. That's why we call this Shabbat HaGadol, based on this Haftorah. But I'm going to give you another reason, a more pertinent reason, a reason which actually can relate to the circumstances we have at the moment, and a lesson taken from them. I'm actually going to explain why this Shabbat is called Gadol, great, the big Shabbat, for another reason. And it's as follows. You know, generally, for miracles, and for example, Hanukkah, which was a big miracle, you know, the Maccabees defeated the Hellenists, and of course Purim, which we had a month ago, where Esther and Mordechai defeated defeated Haman, and we had salvation and we had victory. For those type of miracles, we actually recite a special prayer in our prayer books. Al Hanissim, it's called. Thank God, Al Hanissim, for the miracle, for these miracles. And that's on Hanukkah and Purim. Now, interestingly enough, when it comes to Pesach, I mean, look at the miracles we have on Pesach. The plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea. Now, one would expect such a prayer would be Al Hanissim, would be on Pesach as well in our prayer books. But it's not. We do not say Al Hanissim. But that festival, more than any other, you would think that prayer was relevant. But we don't say it. And I'm going to explain to you by one of the Hasidic masters of the 18th century, Kedushat Halevi, Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, why Al Hanissim is not recited on Pesach. And he explains as follows. The word Nissim, miracle in Hebrew, comes from the word Nissa, which means a test. Nissa, test. Because when a victory or salvation is done by our own human hands, such as it was on Hanukkah with the Maccabees defeating the Hellenists, and on Purim with Mordechai and Esther defeating Haman, when the miracle is by our own hands, Nissa, we have to be tested to understand that this was in partnership with God. We may think we did it, but God is in partnership with us in actually causing this victory or this salvation to come around. However, on Pesach, it wasn't ourselves. Everything was done by God. The plagues, we actually say they were above nature. They were supernatural. We did nothing. We just waited for God's miracles, God's niflaot, they call them. In fact, the Torah calls it, not nes, it calls us vihiketi, and I smote at Mitzrayim, Egypt, bechol niflati, with all my niflati, my wonders, not miracles. As I said, a miracle is one where we are in partnership with God, where God tests us to understand that he was with us. But when it comes to Pesach, it was all God. All God. And therefore, according to Kedushat Halevi, Rav Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, he says, no, the reason we don't say Al Hanissim on the festival of Pesach is because it wasn't a partnership. It was God himself that caused all these wonders. We had no part in it. So, truly, salvation, we believe, only comes around when there is that partnership between ourselves and God. When there is that partnership, true salvation. But where was that partnership when it came to the going out of Egypt, when it came to Yetziat Mitzrayim? Where was that partnership? Where was the partnership that actually allowed true salvation? That's what Shabbat HaGadol is all about. Because what happened was that there was one act that the Jewish people actually participated in, that actually caused the going out of Egypt, where God said, the people are indeed worthy of being redeemed. And that was actually 5 days, the 10th of Nisan, 5 days before they left Egypt. God said to them, take a lamb, which, by the way, at that time, it was a lot of courage to take that lamb. That lamb is a sign of the zodiac at this time of the year. And the Egyptians worshipped the zodiac. And they took that lamb with the Egyptians around them, had the courage to do that, and actually took the lamb as a Korban Pesach, a Passover offering. And this showed God that they were not influenced by the hundreds of years of Egyptian slavery and the various, in inverted commas, gods around them, they were still true to their faith. They did something to show that they were worthy of the partnership between themselves and the Almighty. So it was not just God who actually caused the salvation and the going out of Egypt. The people actually did something 5 days before, which was a Saturday, Shabbat Hagadol. That's why it's called the Great Shabbat, because it showed now there was that partnership and they deserve salvation. And in fact, interestingly enough, when somebody is called a Gadol, he's growing up big, he's no longer Somech al Av, he's no longer dependent upon his father. A person who is called Gadol is no longer actually dependent on the Shulchan Aviv, of the table of his father. He also does his own thing. And on this particular Shabbat, we became Gadol. We showed that we were in partnership with God. Can I say that at this time, when we're going through this crisis, we've got to feel a partnership. We've got to do our part in all those things that are required of us to overcome this crisis and to have salvation from it. But we should also have faith. We should have a partnership with God and feel that emunah, that hope and that faith at this time. Each and every one of us. Because that particular salvation only comes about with that partnership between ourselves and God. After all, each individual, each one of us is a partnership between God and ourselves. The physical self, without godliness within us, without the soul, couldn't exist. Everything depends upon that partnership between the spiritual and the material, so to speak. You know, at the moment, we actually, and thank God for the doctors and the medical workers who are doing wonderful, wonderful things everywhere around the world to help us all. You know, the medical workers are doing a tremendous job and really helping out all of us. But it reminds me actually of a story, and we're talking about partnership between God and ourselves in bringing salvation and bringing help. I recall a number of years ago, when I was rabbi, that Rabbi Steinsaltz, who was a big Talmudic scholar from Israel, came to visit Perth. And Verity James, some of you will remember her, she was an interviewer at the ABC. And she asked me to bring him along actually to the studio because she wanted to interview him. And I went to the studio, I took him along to the studio from the airport, and I'm listening outside at this interview. And Rabbi Steinsaltz is quite a personality. And Verity James, I was listening over the speaker, and Verity James says to him, "Rabbi, I believe you're talking about medical ethics this evening at the Perth Hebrew Congregation. What can you tell me about Jewish medical ethics?" And the rabbi answered and he said, "It says in the Talmud that the best of doctors are destined for hell." To which Verity James got quite taken aback by this and then said to him, "Next you'll be telling me that the best of journalists are destined for hell." And his immediate response was, "Where else will I get a good story?" The truth is, what does it mean that the best of doctors could be destined for hell? And the Talmud answers, and the commentaries answer, and they say, if a doctor feels healing is in his or her hands, and that life is in his or her hands, they're destined for hell. If they feel that they're just agents of God, in partnership with God, in helping others, they're to be blessed. So even in that field, in the field of healing, there's a partnership. Please God, at this time, may we all feel that partnership with the Almighty, with our Creator. And please God, we will overcome this together. And that partnership will give us strength, will give us courage, and indeed, when we come out of this, it'll be a far better world for it. Shabbat Shalom to all of you, and Shabbat Hagadol. Make this a truly great Shabbat. Thank you for listening, everybody.